If I asked you, where did the Irish come from, what would your answer be? Well, you're wrong. I'm Aidan Mattis, and welcome to the Lore Lodge. So, the habitation of Ireland and the way in which the Gaels came to be has been a subject of much debate for historians since forever. The gist of it is that we don't really know what happened because the Druidic class of Ireland themselves were functionally illiterate, and it was a deliberate process. They didn't want to be literate. If you've been watching our videos on King Arthur or the Anglo-Saxons, you've probably caught on to this. But they didn't want people understanding much of what they believed. So some of the best sources we have regarding Druidic practices and how they operated, what they did, who they were, actually comes from sources like Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, where he's less than complimentary. Whereas for the Brythonic Celts, we can actually trace the archaeological evidence to show that they moved from Central Europe, west, north, across the English Channel, and into Britain. For the Germanic peoples, we can tell around when and how they migrated across the continent. For the Latin people, we at the very least can, see how culture spread from Greece into Italy and overtook the Romans. With the Gaels, we don't have any of that. There are many histories that suggest the origins of the Gaels, but for a long time, the one that was best known was called the Lebor Gabála Érenn, which is the Irish Book of Invasions. It's the story of how people got to Ireland, and it involves 6 invasions. Now, earlier stories, like the one recounted in Nennius's Historia Britannicum, suggest that there were only 3 invasions, those of Partholon, Nemed, and Miliad. The Book of Invasions, however, talks of Caser, Partholon, Nemed, the Firbolg, the Tuatha Dé Danann, and then the Milesians. So we're going to jump into exactly who those people were, and you'll understand why this is a Lore Lodge video instead of a History Hut video. So the people of Caser, who arrived first, they are, according to the Lebor Gabála Érenn, which is an 11th century Christian work that is now recognized as a pseudo-history, rather than an actual historical document. It does not recount things that can be confirmed, although some of them do match up with other things, but it's become a very valuable cultural document, partially because it shows us how Christianity changed pagan stories, as well as allowing us to see kind of, what the Irish were keeping up with in terms of their continental cousins in Gaul and Iberia. But the first people to come to Ireland, according to the Lebor Gabála Érenn, were the people of Caser, and Caser was one of Noah's granddaughters, and Noah, rather than just making room on board the ark for her, because, they didn't have space for 2 of every animal in the world, rather than making room on the ark, he was like, you know what, why don't you just go west to the edge of the world and stay there? So they did, and they arrived in Ireland 40 days before the flood, and then proceeded to all be killed by that same flood. Now, the people who actually made it to Ireland were Caser, because there were 3 ships that set out, 2 sank. Caser, 49 other women, Caser's a woman, Caser and 49 other women get to Ireland, and there are 3 surviving men, so they split the women to be with the men evenly, but then 2 of the men die, leaving just one. His name is Fintan. And he can't really handle this level of pressure, so when the flood comes, rather than trying to fix things, he runs away and turns into a salmon. Which, to be fair, if you presented me with 50 women, I would also probably turn into a salmon. That's not it, though. He turns into a salmon, but lives for 5,500 years, and then eventually turns into an eagle and a hawk, and then returns to recount the story to a medieval Irish prince. But that is the end of the people of Caser. They are one of the lesser attested to examples. Then we get the people of Partholon. Now, these are a group who are acknowledged by Nennius before the writing of the Lebor Gabála Érenn, so this is a more accurate view of the story. This is one priest rather than a set of monks and historians trying to Christianize a pagan story. this was just Nennius going about his business. Nennius is not a particularly reliable source, but he also seems to have less of a bias towards Christianization than some of the later people did. It's just that he gets a lot of things wrong because back in the Middle Ages, they didn't really have a good idea of the scale of human chronology. But according to the Lebor Gabála Érenn, the people of Partholon arrived 300 years after the flood, and they are the first to really establish a population in Ireland. According to Nennius, they arrived some numbers in the thousands and eventually had 5,000 men and 4,000 women. According to the Lebor Gabála Érenn, they had 1,000 people when they arrived and then 4,000 by the time of their doom. That doom, of course, was something completely unavoidable. It was a plague that killed all 4,000 of them in a week. And this is one of the places where the origin of the Irish people gets muddied a bit. Because remember how I asked where they came from at the beginning of the video? Well, Lebor Gabála Érenn says that they came from Greece, whereas Nennius says Iberia. Now, is it possible that this was a mix-up and that they came from a Greek settlement in Iberia? Supposedly. Massalia definitely was making trips up to Britannia and Hibernia in the classical era, but we don't know for certain. It seems to just be a retelling. It seems more likely that Nennius was correct and that the painting of these people as Greeks was more to work them into the Christian narrative and bring it so that the Celts were not these savage pagans, but rather had the lineage of civilized people within them. But even if they were from Greece, the Greeks are not immune to plagues, and so plague wiped them all out, and they were followed by the people of Nemid. Now, Nemid, once again, according to the Lebor Gabála Érenn, is a descendant of Noah. This is a running theme within this work. And another running theme within this work is that it tries to match up the Irish origin story with the 6 ages of the world as relating to the Christian Bible. So what you have is Nemid is coming and being a descendant of Noah, coming from Greece. And in typical fashion of these stories, he sets sail with 44 ships from Greece, and all but one of them sink. Now, whereas Partholon's people were the first to really populate Ireland, even though they were all wiped out, Nemid's people are the first to really establish stratified society. They build cities and towns and forts, and they actually have something going here. And according to the story, they end up numbering in the many, many tens of thousands, rather than just, under 10,000 people. And this all leads up to a war with a group of people who we can't really identify. These are the Femorians, and what we know of the Femorians is that they lived off the landmass of Ireland on another landmass with a great tower on it. They get described in a lot of different ways, and sometimes they are reptilian, sometimes they are like fish, and sometimes they are just human beings. It really seems to depend on who the enemy the Irish people were fighting at the point in history the story was being written down. Who was that? Now, it's possible that this could have just been Britons from the Isle of Man, and that this, over the many, many years of oral retelling of the story, got overhyped to be an entirely separate race of, monstrous beings, and they could have just been other Celts. We don't really know. But for 9 years, Nemid leads his people against the Femorians with a lot of success, until he is killed by, you guessed it, a plague. After the plague, there's a little bit of a rut, but then the Nemedians renew their efforts against the Femorians, and 60,000 of them attack the Femorians in their homeland at sea, and it's said that there are 30,000 at sea and 30,000 on land, so this must have been a sizable island for this many people, for this great of a battle to occur, right? So that's why I said perhaps the Isle of Man or the Orkneys or something like that. There have been some suggestions that this could even be related to Iceland, but as far as we know, Iceland was not really inhabited more than seasonally until the Viking settlements of that island in the 800s and 900s AD. In this final struggle between the Nemedians and the Femorians, they do defeat the one brother, the one prince who rules over them. His name is Conan, and though they defeat him, they are eventually crushed by his brother Mork, and they are forced to retreat. Now, they split into two groups, the Firbolg, who returned to Greece, and the other group, there's only 30 survivors. So some of them go into the north of the world, and these people will come back later in a very recognizable role. The ones who return to Greece are called the Firbolg, and that exact word means people of the sack, not to be confused with the Sackville Baggins from Lord of the Rings. Now, these people are enslaved by the Greeks, they toil for many, many, many years, and then eventually they are able to escape. And according to the book, they escape at the same time that the Jews escape from Egypt in Exodus. So if we were to suggest that this was an actual event, that these people did set sail from Greece, that they did do it at the same time as the Exodus story, this would all be occurring sometime between 1500 and 1200 BC. But it's also more likely just an attempt to bring the Irish origin story into the fold of Christianity and present it as mirroring with the struggles of the Israelites. When the Firbolg arrive back in Ireland, they establish 5 provinces under 5 kings, and the High King is seated at the Hill of Tara, which would actually remain the place where High Kings of Ireland were crowned throughout the remainder of Irish independent history up until it was conquered by the English in the 12th century. After that, the English tried to make the Irish not exist. Didn't work, but they did try. Also, if any Irish people see this and they want to do what they did to me on TikTok over the summer, yes, Ireland had kings. There were many kings. There were petty kings. There were high kings. I don't know why people got so upset with me for saying that. I think it's because I used the term royal families, and Irish people seem to have a negative connotation with that term. I was not talking about the British royal family. I am talking about specifically Gaelic royal families, as in the families of ruling kings in Gaelic chiefdoms and kingdoms. 37 years into the rule of the Firbolg over Ireland, that group of people who went into the north of the world returns. And keep in mind, we're now several hundred years removed from when the Nemedians were defeated by the Femorians and had to leave Ireland. So the people who reappear are the Tuatha Dé Danann. And the Tuatha Dé Danann are a very interesting cultural group. They actually end up defeating the Firbolg in combat, taking over, and as far as we know, the Firbolg just simply flee Ireland. They leave. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to be there. God forbid they live with people who are, their ethnic cousins. Very racist, the Firbolg. Or it could be the Tuatha Dé Danann that are racist, I guess. It's prehistory. They're probably both racist. At this point, for the first time, we get something that is recognizable Celtic paganism in the Lebor Gabála Érenn. As I said before, the Druids didn't really write stuff down. They kind of did that on purpose. According to Caesar, the Gauls would, for personal reasons like finance and whatnot, use Greek, or at least the Greek alphabet, to write. But they wouldn't write down their rituals. It was just, inventories and finance and whatnot. But what we find with the Tuatha Dé Danann is that they are very similar to attested Celtic pagan deities from the pan-Celtic pantheon. So the Celts weren't like the Romans where they had a stratified religious system. They instead had various local deities and a few higher level deities who actually were common throughout all of the different Celtic tribes across Europe. For example, you have Lugus, Taranis, Catabuadua, Ogamios, and Caranunos, Epona. Some of these deities have cognate versions within the Lebor Gabála Érenn, who seem to just be perhaps the Celtiberian version of these gods, because what we generally believe now is that the Gaels, as we know them, did in fact come from Iberia, and they were Celtiberian peoples who inhabited the island directly west of Britain, and that's why their language, their deities, their practices are all more similar to continental Celtic practices than to insular Celtic practices like the Britons and the Picts. So the Tuatha Dé Danann, who have essentially superpowers, arrive back in Ireland, they battle the Firbolg, they battle the Femorians, and they actually end up beating both of these people and establishing their own rule over Ireland. But it's not long before the arrival of the Milesians. And these would be the people we recognize today as Gaels. They would have come from Iberia. They would have been led by somebody named Miliad, or perhaps Mils Espanier. This could possibly come from a misinterpretation of someone being named as the soldier of Spain who actually led these people here, because that would etymologically make sense for the term Mils Espaniae, but we don't know for certain. What we do know is that they supposedly came there during the fourth age of humanity, the fourth age of the world, which would have been between King David's rise to power in Israel and the Babylonian captivity. So this would have been between the 700s and the 500s BC, which is the first time that the timing is actually possibly correct for people being in Ireland. We don't really have evidence of intensive human habitation of the island of Hibernia. All we have is, little hunter-gatherer artifacts here and there. It is suggested by Nennius that in between the times when these people inhabited Ireland, there may have been Brythonic Celts from Wales or Pictland who came over and established settlements, but at no point was it inhabited in the way that it was in the Middle Ages until perhaps around 500 BC. Now, the first attestation we have for people in Ireland is as late as 500 AD. So we don't actually know for a fact when people arrived in Ireland. We don't know the origin of the Gaels in Ireland. All we can do is look at the similarities between them and their Celtiberian ancestors and the people across the Sea of Ireland in Britain. So at the beginning of this video, I asked you the question, where did the Irish come from? And then I told you were wrong. Because truth of the matter is, we don't fucking know. We've got no idea. We have no clue. Our only real answer is they have a very similar DNA profile with native Celtiberians, like Galicians. We really don't know where the Irish came from, and it's a question that doesn't seem to be easily answerable with archaeology, because it just seems that everything's been either not recorded or wiped away. So we may never know, or perhaps we just haven't looked in all the right places, but it's a fascinating piece of folklore to think about the idea that, somewhere back there, there's probably a real story behind how 6 different groups of invasions got to Ireland. And maybe that story is that, well, the Christians who were trying to retell the story were trying to match it up to the 6 ages of the world, and so they have everybody going over there at the time that they did. And in reality, maybe there were only 3 invasions, and maybe they were all Celtiberian groups. Maybe one of them was Brythonic, but somewhere back deep in prehistory, it seems that there were a series of invasions into Ireland, and the version of the story we have, while exaggerated, probably does have its roots in true historical concepts. But that's really all I have for you today. So if you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share it with a friend. And if you really want to support us, hop over onto Patreon. We have a $1 tier that we would absolutely love if you subscribe to. So if you're interested in supporting us, that's one way to do it. You can also check out the link in the bio, which is aidenmattis.card.co. That has sponsorships and our other social media and whatnot. So make sure to check that out. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, pretty much anywhere at the Aiden Mattis. You can follow our technical director and co-host Aidan Thornbury at Director Aiden on TikTok and Instagram. And I do believe that is it. So if you enjoyed this video, thanks for stopping by. We hope to see you again. And this has been the Lore Lodge.